Welcome to Parkbench Tutors. For more information about Parkbench Tutors, you can look us up on parkbenchtutors.com or you can find us on Facebook. In this little access podcast, we're going to look at profit and loss. For our example, we're going to take a small clothing factory run by Babitha, and she employs several workers. She produces garments and sells them to the local stores. The business is in fact her living, and her aim then is to make a profit. This is the aim of most businesses. So what do we mean by a profit? Well, if the income that she receives during a period is greater than all her expenses, then she's made a profit, and she's happy. Profit is equal to the income less the expenses. So what then is a loss? Well, if the expenditure by the business exceeds the income for a given period, then the business has made a loss, and she is not happy. So, what type of profit? Profit can have two different meanings, so let's have a look at this. Babitha has sales of 100,000 in March. She has to pay 20,000 for the cloth, and all her other expenses were 60,000. So you can see that what I've separated off is the cloth from the other expenses. And you might wonder why I've done this, but think about this. The cloth is actually used to make the clothing which will then be sold. So what's the profit? So let's consider her sales of 100,000 in March and her cloth costing 20,000. A cloth is regarded as what we call cost of sales. So 100,000 less that 20,000 is 80,000, and we call this the gross profit. Sales less cost of sales is equal to gross profit. So what about the other expenses? There are £60,000 of those. Well, we subtract those from the gross profit. So 80,000 less 60,000 is £20,000, and that figure is then called the net profit. So gross profit less expenses will give you the net profit, and they're happy. Right, during February, Babitha purchased £15,000 worth of cloth on credit, paid wages of £28,000, paid rent of £9,000, and receives an electricity bill of £12,000. So what was the cost of the sales, and what are her other expenses? Well, her other expenses, so we subtract we don't count the cost of the cloth now, we just look at the wages, the rent, and the electricity bill, and they should come to £49,000. If she sells £90,000 of goods, what is her gross profit? Well, we're going to subtract from the 90,000 the 15,000 that she paid for the cloth. What's her net profit? Well, we've got to subtract now the other expenses, the 49,000 from the gross profit. That will give us a net profit of 26,000. Now let's look at her January figures. She made a net profit of 18,000 and her gross profit was 68,000. So can we figure out what her expenses were for January? Remember, net profit is equal to gross profit minus expenses. So expenses must be equal to gross profit minus the net profit. In other words, 68,000 minus 18,000, which comes to £50,000, and that's her expenses. Now let's look at her figures for trading in December. Here's a list of her transactions for that period: some sales, some wages, some rent as an expense, another sale, another expense, a purchase of cloth. Remember, that's going to be cost of sales. So does she make a profit or a loss? And if so, how much? Okay, let's start with those figures again. Sales of garments to Harry Lime, that's obviously representing income. Wages is an expense, rent is an expense, goods sold is income, received electricity bill is an expense, purchase of cloth is cost of sales, and of course sales to Smiley Fashions is income. So I total my sales up and I have 66,000. I put my cost of sales down, my purchase of cloth, that's 16,000, and the expenses were 41,000. So I have the three figures that I need now. Sales 66,000, cost of sales 16,000, and expenses 41,000. So the gross profit, I'm going to take the cost of sales from the sales, which is 66,000 minus 16,000, that's 50,000. And for the net profit, I'm going to take the expenses from the gross profit. So 50,000 minus 41,000 is equal to 9,000. The business has made a net profit of 9,000. That ends this short podcast. Thank you for watching and for listening. For more information, find us at parkbenchtutors.com or look us up on Facebook.